In an unexpected moment of raw vulnerability, legendary boxer Mike Tyson broke down in tears during a live television interview after receiving a heartfelt letter from Ibrahim Traoré, the President of Burkina Faso. What was meant to be a routine discussion about Tyson's new memoir and upcoming Netflix documentary turned into a deeply emotional exchange that revealed a surprising connection and mutual respect between two powerful men from vastly different worlds. The segment began like any other. Tyson appeared calm, slightly weary, but focused. As the cameras rolled, the host smiled and leaned in. "Mike, you've seen it all. But today, we have something you didn't expect." Tyson raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" The host was handed a cream-colored envelope adorned with gold lettering. "This arrived last night, from West Africa," the host said. "A letter from the President of Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré. He said, it's meant for you, and only you, but he gave us permission to read it on air, if you're okay with that." Mike hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead." What followed was not just surprising, it was soul-stirring. The letter unlocked something deep inside Tyson. Not the fighter, not the legend, but the wounded boy behind the gloves, and the man who, across continents, had felt seen by him. The host read aloud. "Dear Mr. Tyson, my name is Ibrahim Traoré, President of the Transition in Burkina Faso. I write not as a politician, but as a boy who once had nothing, who watched you fight on a flickering television in a crowded room." Tyson's expression shifted. His breathing changed. "You were not just a boxer. You were proof that pain could become power, that a boy from nowhere could stand before giants and make them fall." Mike leaned forward. "When my country was hurting, I remembered your eyes in the ring, not your fists, your eyes. The pain, the fire, the refusal to be broken. I try to lead my people with that same fire." The studio was silent. "Thank you, Mike Tyson, for teaching me to rise, not just as a fighter, but as a man." Tyson looked away. His voice cracked. "Stop. Just stop for a second." Tears began to form, slowly at first, then heavily. He tried to hold them back, but couldn't. "He saw me," Mike whispered. "Not the knockouts, not the fame, just me." His voice trembled. "I was 14, homeless, angry. I wanted to die. Nobody knew. Nobody cared. I fought because that was the only way anyone noticed me." The audience gasped. He looked straight into the camera. "And now, to know that halfway across the world, someone watched me and became a president?" He broke down. No one moved. No one cut to commercial. The toughest man in the ring had become the most human man in the room. In that moment, it wasn't about boxing anymore. It was about being seen. The boy who once had no voice had inspired another boy to become a leader. From pain came purpose, from punches came peace, and from a letter came healing. After the show, cut to break. Tyson sat silently, still wiping tears. The host leaned in. "Do you want to continue?" Mike nodded. "Yeah. The world needs to hear this." When they returned to the air, there were no scripts, no promos, just truth. "Ibrahim Traoré," Mike began, his voice thick with emotion. "I've never met you, but I feel like I know you." He held the letter gently, reverently. "I wasn't supposed to survive. I was a thief, a fighter. I was locked up before I ever knew love." The crowd leaned in. "But this man, this president, he saw strength in my suffering. Nobody talks about the hunger, the pain, the nights you pray not to wake up. But this letter told me I wasn't alone." The bright studio had become a sanctuary of reflection. One man's tears had sparked another's message, and now the world was listening. That same evening, halfway across the world, President Ibrahim Traoré sat alone in his modest office in Ouagadougou. The lights were low. A ceiling fan hummed overhead. His security detail stood quietly outside, giving him space. He was watching the interview live. And when Mike cried, Traoré looked down. his own eyes wet. Wiping away his own tears, President Ibrahim Traoré sat quietly in his office. He felt it, he whispered in French. He really felt it. Behind him, the wall wasn't filled with portraits of world leaders or polished medals. Instead, it was lined with photos. Children in dusty classrooms, farmers in sun-soaked fields, nurses, soldiers. His people. Among them, a small framed picture stood out. A young Mike Tyson, shirtless, fists clenched, eyes burning. It had never been about boxing. It was always about the spirit. Just then, his assistant entered the room with an update. The UN just reached out. They saw the interview. They want to revisit your education reforms. Traoré nodded slowly. Let them wait. Tonight, the world doesn't need politics. He turned back to the screen. Tonight, it needs truth. Back in New York, the interview had gone viral. Within hours, it was everywhere. Clips of Mike Tyson breaking down over the president's letter spread like wildfire. Celebrities reposted it. Schools showed it in classrooms. Refugee camps in Africa cheered. But the story wasn't over. Because, just after midnight, Mike Tyson's phone rang. Unknown number, international code. He hesitated, then picked up. Hello? A calm, steady voice responded. Mr. Tyson, this is Ibrahim Traoré. Mike froze. You're the guy from the letter. Yes, Traoré said. And you're the man who taught me how to survive. When I was just a boy with no shoes. They didn't speak like icons, not as legends. They spoke like survivors. Thank you, Mike whispered. No, Traoré replied. Thank you. You gave me the courage to stand up when the world told me to kneel. There was a pause. Then came the question. Mike, would you come to Burkina Faso? Mike blinked, stunned. What for? Not for a fight, Traoré said. For hope. And in that moment, two men, born worlds apart, scarred by different battles, found a bridge through pain. Something extraordinary had just begun. Mike Tyson didn't sleep that night. After hanging up, he sat alone, reading Traoré's letter again and again. There were no fancy words, just truth. One line echoed in his head. When I was 13, I fought not with gloves, but with hunger. Mike had lived that too. He remembered stealing food from corner stores in Brooklyn, fighting bullies in the streets, getting locked up as a teenager. No one believed in him, except one trainer. Just like Ibrahim, who had no one, until he believed in himself. Next morning, Mike's team entered his dressing room with his packed schedule. Brand deals, media interviews, training shoots. He glanced at it, then tore it in half. I'm flying to Burkina Faso, he said. They stared, stunned. Are you sure? He looked up, eyes burning with the same fire he once brought to the ring. It's not about boxing anymore. It's about the kid I was, and the boy he still is. 2 days later, Mike Tyson arrived in Ouagadougou. No red carpets, no paparazzi, just heat, dust, and disbelief. Children ran barefoot alongside his car, shouting, Mike Tyson, Mike Tyson. But he wasn't there to be a hero. President Traoré met him at the modest government house. No press, no speeches, just a long, silent handshake between two men who already understood each other. They didn't talk politics. They talked pain. Traoré took Mike to a rural school. Cracked walls, patched uniforms, but laughter everywhere. One boy had a swollen eye, clearly from a fight. Mike sat beside him on the floor. You fight? He asked. The boy nodded. Mike whispered, Me too. But you know what the strongest punch is? The boy looked at him. The one you don't throw. He slipped off his championship ring and placed it in the boy's hands, just for a moment. The boy trembled. Then Traoré knelt beside them. In this country, he said gently, you are not your scars. You are your spirit. The boy cried. And so did Mike. That night, on a quiet rooftop overlooking the lights of Ouagadougou, the boxer and the president sat side by side. Traoré handed Mike a wooden box. Inside were dozens of letters written by children across Burkina Faso. "They heard about the letter I sent you," Traoré said. "Now they've written to you." Mike opened one. "Dear Mike Tyson, you are a lion who made it through fire. Please don't forget us." Another read, "My papa died protecting our village, but now I believe I can be strong. Like you." Tears rolled down Mike's face. He held the letters like they were sacred. These are worth more than belts, more than anything I ever won." Traoré nodded. "And now you see, brother, pain connects us, more than fame ever could." The wind rustled through the pages of the letters. The air was still. Nothing spoke louder than the silence between two men who had once been broken boys and had chosen to rise. At the bottom of the box, Mike found one last letter, torn notebook paper, simple handwriting. "Dear Mr. Tyson, my name is Maddie. I am 11 years old. My father was a soldier. He said your fights gave him courage," the letter read. "He died last year. Now I try to be brave. I saw you cry. That means even lions cry. So maybe I can cry too." Mike Tyson's hands trembled. The words blurred behind tears. He remembered being 11, watching his mother fade away, feeling like the world had no space for boys like him. He whispered to no one in particular, "Even lions cry." President Ibrahim Traoré stood beside him, silent but understanding. Then he spoke gently. "That boy, Maddie, he lives nearby. Would you like to meet him?" Mike didn't respond with words. He just nodded. The next morning, they drove for 2 hours through the dust-streaked roads of rural Burkina Faso, past goats, women balancing jugs of water on their heads, and boys playing football with plastic bags tied into spheres. When they arrived, a barefoot boy ran out of a small home, his eyes wide with awe. He wasn't meeting a celebrity. He was meeting someone broken, just like himself. Maddie stood frozen, clutching a weathered photo of his father in a soldier's uniform. The edges were frayed like it had been held through many nights of silent grief. Mike knelt down, eye to eye with the boy. "You're braver than I ever was, little man." Maddie blinked. Tears welled. "But I cry." Mike smiled softly. "So do I." Without warning, Maddie stepped forward and hugged him. Not the kind of hug made for cameras, but the kind given out of fear that someone might leave again. Mike held him tightly, and then he broke. The tears came fast, loud, soul-shaking sobs. There were no cameras. The media crew stayed back, but Traoré stood nearby, his hand over his chest, his eyes glassy. It wasn't just a hug between a child and a boxing legend. It was pain meeting pain, loss meeting loss, healing being born in between. Later, under the shade of a mango tree, Maddie asked in a whisper, "Will you leave too?" Mike looked him in the eyes. "I'll be back. I promise." And this time, he meant it. 2 days later, Mike returned to America. The interview was already booked, a major national broadcast. It was supposed to be about boxing, but things had changed. The host joked, "You've been off the grid, Mike. Africa, huh? Starting a new fight club?" Mike chuckled, then paused. "Actually, I was being healed by an 11-year-old boy." The studio fell silent. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Maddie's letter. "Even lions cry," he read aloud. His voice cracked. Right there, live, in front of millions, the most feared man in boxing broke down. The room froze. There was nothing performative in his tears, just truth. "I met kids who've lost everything," Mike said. "And yet they have more heart than most champions I've ever seen." He looked directly into the camera. "Ibrahim Traoré, thank you for reminding me that real strength isn't in fists. It's in love." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Across the world, people watched in silence. Some cried, some smiled. But all felt something they hadn't in a long time: hope. The next morning, Mike's phone rang. He didn't recognize the number but answered anyway. "Mike Tyson," he said. A calm voice replied, "This is Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso." There was a pause. Then, "I saw what you did for Maddie. You didn't just honor his father. You healed something, in him, and in yourself." Mike said nothing at first, overcome. Then Traoré continued, "I want to invite you back, not just for one boy, but for a nation. I want you to speak to our youth. Tell them your story. Show them what it means to rise from nothing." Mike exhaled deeply. "You don't know what that means to me, brother." "I do," Traoré replied. 48 hours later, Mike was on a plane back to Burkina Faso. This wasn't about promotion. It wasn't about boxing. It was about redemption. He was no longer fighting for fame. He was fighting for hope. The schoolyard in Ouagadougou was packed. Hundreds of students in faded uniforms sat on the dusty ground. Some clutched old photos of Tyson. Others held notebooks. They waited. Mike arrived quietly. No entourage, no stage lights. Just a chair, a translator, and a story. He began slowly. His voice was steady but soft, and every word hit like a punch. "I used to think I was just a weapon. I didn't know I had a heart until I listened to a child." He spoke of Maddie, of his own mother's death, of prison, of rage, of how he fought in the ring, because he didn't know how to fight his pain any other way. Tears welled in the eyes of boys who once believed real men never cry. Then Mike stood, stepped off the platform, and walked into the crowd. The crowd went quiet. Mike Tyson stepped forward and pointed gently at a boy in the crowd. You think no one sees you, but I do. You're strong, even when you feel broken." The boy began to cry, then another, then another. From the back, President Ibrahim Traoré wiped away a tear. This wasn't a speech. It was a revolution of hearts. That night, Mike and President Traoré sat beneath a sky full of stars. No press, no cameras. Just two men, weathered by life, full of emotion. Mike finally broke the silence. "Why did you write that letter, Mr. President?" Traoré smiled softly. "Because I saw the boy behind the fighter, and I believed the world still needed him." Mike didn't respond. His throat tightened. Then Traoré added quietly, "You remind my people that strength isn't in fists. It's in getting back up, again and again, after life knocks you down." Mike nodded. "That's all I ever tried to do." They didn't just shake hands. They clasped them like brothers, like two survivors who had crossed oceans to meet, soul to soul. The next morning, photos from the school visit went viral, but not for fame. People across the world cried watching Mike hug children, telling them they mattered, reminding them that scars aren't shameful. They're proof you survived. Mike Tyson left Burkina Faso not just as a boxing legend, but as a healer. And the world began to see President Ibrahim Traoré in a new light. Not just as a leader, but as a listener of hearts. Back in New York, Mike returned to the studio where everything had started. The host invited him back for a follow-up interview. The producers expected sound bites and smiles. What they got was silence. The lights dimmed. Mike looked older, wiser. His hands trembled slightly. The host asked, "Mike, what changed you the most in Burkina Faso?" Mike looked into the camera and whispered, "A child and a president." Then, from his coat pocket, he pulled out a small drawing. It was from Maddie, the boy from the village. A simple sketch. Mike holding Maddie's hand. President Traoré standing behind them, smiling. The studio went still. Mike's voice cracked. He doesn't want to fight anymore. He just wants to grow. The host, normally quick with words, said nothing. "That boy gave me peace," Mike continued. "And Traoré, he gave me purpose." A single tear rolled down his cheek. And in that moment, the world didn't see a fighter or a legend. They saw a man finally healing. After the show, Mike sat alone in his dressing room. A staff member knocked gently and handed him a brown envelope. "Just arrived. International. Mail." Inside was a second letter. the handwriting instantly familiar. President Ibrahim Traoré had written, "My brother Mike. They call me a president, but I am just a man who dreams. Dreams of healing. Dreams of peace. Your visit reminded us that pain is not the end. It's a beginning, if we dare to feel it, not fight it. Burkina Faso thanks you. I thank you. And the boy now sleeps peacefully." Mike stared at the letter, silent. For the first time in years, he whispered a prayer. Not for himself, but for every broken kid in the world. And for every leader with a heart. He pressed the letter to his chest. "I was never the baddest man on the planet," he whispered. "I was just a boy, waiting to be heard." And finally, someone had listened. 1 week. That's all it took to turn pain into purpose. Mike stood on a balcony in Harlem, watching a group of neighborhood kids sparring below. He wasn't their coach. He was just present. When one boy tripped and fell, Mike didn't laugh. He walked down, lifted the boy up, and said, "Every fall teaches you how to rise." His phone buzzed. A photo appeared. It was from Burkina Faso. Maddie was smiling, standing outside a brand new boxing gym. The sign read, "Tyson Hope Center, sponsored by the government of Burkina Faso. Signed by President Ibrahim Traoré." Mike closed his eyes. The world had once called him a monster. Now, a boy across the ocean saw him as a mentor. And for Mike Tyson, that was enough.